the distinct honor and privilege to introduce His Excellency Mehmet Şimşek, the Minister of Treasury and Finance of the Republic of Turkey. Mehmet Şimşek previously served as Turkey's Deputy Prime Minister for Economic and Financial Affairs from 2015 to 2018. During his tenure as Minister of Finance from 2009 to 2015 and Minister of Economy from 2007 and 2009, Şimşek championed structural reforms and prudent macroeconomic policies, contributing to Turkey's resilient position amid various domestic and external shocks. His leadership in enhancing a credit guarantee scheme played a crucial role in steering Turkey away from recession following the 2016 failed coup attempt. His earlier roles included positions at Merrill Lynch in London, Deutsche Bender Securities in Istanbul, UBS Securities on Wall Street, and as a senior economist at the US Embassy in Ankara. Foreign Policy magazine has listed him among the 500 most powerful individuals globally, while Emerging Markets magazine has honored Şimşek as Finance Minister of the Year for Emerging Europe. Please welcome His Excellency Mehmet Şimşek.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be at TRT World Forum, and the subject is a pretty exciting one and pretty relevant one. I do have a presentation because a picture sometimes is worth thousands of words. Let me see if I can get it to work. We are actually at the beginning of a new era, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit in terms of global, big global trends and challenges. We see risks, but also opportunities for Turkey. And I also would like to cover the ground or tell you a little bit about whether or not our program is working. If you look at the big picture, oops, gone too far. We have geopolitical tensions driven by geostrategic competition, mainly between China and the United States. But also, we know that this has already led to some fragmentation, as well as trade protectionism post-global financial crisis. So this is a big headwind for global growth. Secondly, we have aging populations. We have high global indebtedness. These two factors are also speed limits to global growth. On the top of all this, we have global warming, an impending global, climate disaster in the making. So clearly, all of these suggest that the world is faced with significant headwinds in terms of growth and also stability. There's a lot of uncertainty. Now, if I were to show you a couple of pictures here, first of all, the hyper-globalization era is behind us. Whether or not we deglobalize going forward is one issue, but clearly the conditions for the high-speed globalization is behind us. In fact, if you look at post-global financial crisis, what you see is increasingly, this is either going too fast or too slow. You see a lot of restrictions, a lot of barriers to trade. Now, we know that trade is the engine of growth. This engine right now is sputtering at best. The number of trade restrictions everywhere is obviously quite widespread, and that includes emerging markets as well as mature markets. And what you see, it doesn't only apply to goods, it's beginning to apply to services, but also even to investments, even to financial flows. So this is not just about trade in goods. This is an important, I think, headwind for global growth going forward. In terms of aging populations, just to remind you, if you go back to 50s, population over 65 years old made up only 5% of total population. Today, it makes up 10%, so it has doubled. But it looks set to, from here, almost double by 2050. This is a very fast aging. And this will bring about a lot of complications. Let's face it, fiscal positions will be under stress. Productivity is going to be impacted. So aging populations is a big challenge going forward. Turkey is doing well in tourism. We think this could be one sector where we could take advantage of going forward in the long run, because our services industry is pretty developed, pretty sophisticated. Global indebtedness. If you go back to 20 years ago, roughly speaking, debt to GDP ratio was high, around 230% of GDP. Today, it's gone up by 100 percentage points. So globally, we are highly leveraged. This is yet another potentially headwind. Why? Because how do you deal with debt at a time of low growth and potentially high interest rates? This is going to be the challenge. So if growth is going to be slow and rates are going to stay high for a while, or stay higher than what it has been, then clearly it'd be very difficult to handle global debt. Again, global warming. There is no more theoretical discussions here. I think there's plenty of evidence that global temperatures are rising beyond what is tolerable. And this is going to bring about significant problems. Again, I've seen some studies that argue that global warming at the current speed could reduce global growth by 1 full percentage points per year. I know this is probably one of the worst case scenarios, but even if it reduces it by 0.5 percentage points, this is still huge. Food insecurities, rising inequalities, mass migration potentially on the back of climate, conflicts. So I know I painted pretty bleak picture, but these are some of the uncertainties that we face going forward. Dealing with potential climate disaster requires collective response. And in a world that we are in today, that's hardly the case. We live now in a world that no longer respects the most basic rules. It reminds me Antonio Gramsci's very famous quote. When he was imprisoned by Mussolini, he wrote extensively the prison notes. He says, "The old world is dying. The new world is struggling to be born. Now, it is the time of monsters." The old world, the rule-based, post-Second World War, is behind us. There is no even respect the most basics rules anymore. Look at what's happening in Gaza. Look at some countries' stance. They cannot even call for a ceasefire. They cannot even have the courage to call for a ceasefire. This is the type of world we are in today. We don't have a new rule-based system. We don't have a substitute yet, because a hegemon power and a rising superpower and many other players are actually trying to see how this new system is going to be shaped. And that brings about a lot of uncertainty in doing business, but also in general for global economy. The IMF sees global growth at 3% for the next 5 years, and global trade growth of about 3.5%. This is meaningfully below what it has been over the past couple of decades, which includes, by the way, global financial crisis as well as the pandemic. So 2 major events, and still the outlook for the next 5 years is worse than what we've had over the past 20 years. So, how about Turkey? Well, we're not an island nation, and even if you're an island nation, of course you get affected. But we have plenty of opportunities and risks for Turkey. When we look at Turkey, I think one thing that comes to my mind is, if the world is going to be the way it is today, meaning more fragmentation, more trade protectionism, etc., clearly nearshoring and friendshoring is going to become a dominant theme going forward. Because of the customs union and long-standing relations and institutional whatever partnership with EU, we consider ourselves as near and friend. With Middle East and North Africa similarly, with Central Asia similarly. So if you do a simple, 4-hour flight, Turkey potentially could reach 1.3 billion people and $28 trillion GDP. So Turkey could be it is already a major manufacturing base, but it could strengthen that position through nearshoring and friendshoring. But this requires macro-financial stability, reforms that will help boost productivity and competitiveness. So there's plenty of homework to do. But this is one key advantage that we have. Another important issue is, if you look at the past 20 years, Turkey's relative growth performance, which is the dotted line, in real terms, is actually pretty good. It's at par with emerging markets. But if you exclude India and China, which is the orange line, we've done much better than emerging markets. So on a relative basis, there is pretty decent outperformance. To sustain this, again, what we need is predictability, is rule-based policy making, which is exactly what we've been trying to do, and we will continue to deliver. If you look at Turkey, it's a sizable market. Our working age population is bigger than, as you can see, 18 EU members combined. This matters. So if we can get our house in order, no company can afford ignoring Turkey with such strong prospects and such a sizable market. So that's really the key. If we look at the working age population growth for the past decade and a half, which is likely to last for the next decade and a half, you can see that Turkey still offers significant growth prospects. And this, again, requires reforms like labor market reform to boost employment and clearly productivity. So we have opportunities, but to take advantage, we need to do more. If you look at total indebtedness in Turkey, it's roughly about 117%. This includes household debt, private sector debt, sovereign debt. It includes essentially all debt. Compared to emerging markets, Turkey is in good shape. And that also provides an advantage for Turkey going forward. Green transition is one of the key agenda items in our program. Why? Because we know it's good to do. It's the right thing to do, but it has direct benefits that is not comparable with some other countries. First of all, Turkey's Achilles heel is current account deficit. And current account deficit is dominated by energy imports. So when you reduce your dependency on energy imports, it will help ensure macro-financial stability, enhance resilience, enhance competitiveness. Also through that, we can create quality jobs, as well as achieving net zero. So, the message here is to realize the opportunities, much needs to be done. Are we doing the right things? So that's the question. Yes, we are. We have a lot of homework. Attaining price stability, restoring fiscal health, rebalancing growth on a sustained basis, narrowing current account deficit. All of these require implementing a comprehensive structural reforms, as well as sound policies. So, inflation has to come down. Inflation will not defy gravity. We are doing all the right things to bring inflation down. I know market still has a degree of skepticism. We respect that. That means we have to deliver before we can win them over. But if you look at month-on-month inflation dynamics, already there is strong evidence that disinflation has begun. And it will accelerate, and it will be very visible in the second half of next year. We've been very clear. What are we doing to achieve that? Well, there is the conventional monetary policy tightening, but there's also selective credit tightening and quantitative tightening. Well, I've been given only 25 minutes, so I don't have time to go into details. But we're doing textbook. We're doing everything that is needed to bring inflation down. I am convinced that there will be plenty of evidence going forward that inflation is falling in line with our central bank's estimates, if not lower. I'm actually convinced, looking at the recent trends. If you look at fiscal position, if you look at last 20 years, Turkey has been fiscally prudent. If you look at deficit to GDP for the past 20 plus years, it's been roughly about 2.4%. Pretty decent performance. Maastricht criteria of 3%. But this year and next year, going to be challenging. This year and next year is largely dominated by the earthquake, even though there was also some impact of elections. This year, we've penciled in a deficit of 6.4% of GDP when we redesigned our program. But it looks like we're going to do much better than 6.4%. The deficit is going to be significantly below, hopefully, 6% of GDP. And that's despite actually earmarking whatever the money is needed, deploying whatever resources are needed to recover from devastating February earthquakes. Next year, earthquake is still going to be an important factor in deficit. But from 2025 onwards, 2026, we will return to primary surpluses. We will return to deficits that are sub, hopefully, 3% of GDP. This will give us fiscal room to do more reforms. Because reforms, they don't all come, I mean, there are low-hanging fruits, the ones that are easy to do, but some of them require fiscal space. And that's why we need fiscal discipline to achieve that. Growth has been strong in Turkey. If you look at the last 100 years, growth has been close to 5% of GDP. If you look at last 20 years, it's been about 5.5%. 5.5% growth is pretty good. Now, growth looks set to slow next year. I know there are concerns. Yes, there may be a temporary slowdown. But as evidence, emerges that the program is working, I think local portfolio preferences and global inflows will reduce the downside to growth. And therefore, but even if it proves to be, even if we get more downside than what we have penciled in here, it's highly likely to be temporary. We know that disinflation supports sustainable high growth. And Turkey has all the dynamics to grow fast, but we just need to make it sustainable. And this requires disinflation. This requires price stability. And price stability has been essential in actually advancing Turkey's growth over the past 20 years. If we look at growth recently, it's been not of very top quality. Why? Simple. Because net exports contribution has been negative. We would like to reduce the drag on growth from net exports. This is what we mean by rebalancing. As we rebalance, inflation will fall, current account deficit will narrow, and that's really the key to long-term sustainable growth. I don't have time to go into details, but if you look at current account deficit this year, it's largely dominated by gold imports, the pinkish part of the chart. Why? Why Turkish people are importing so much gold? After all, it's not edible. Well, the monetary policy practices of the past has led to gold demand as a hedge against inflation. But now that we're going to bring inflation down, the need for such a hedge is going to diminish. And therefore, gold imports is going to moderate. If you look at the past 20 years, gold imports amounted to roughly about $8 billion a year. This year, it's over $30 billion. Even if gold imports moderates in tune of, like going down from about $31 billion to about $16 billion, current account deficit next year could be less than 3% of GDP. But we're not relying on that. We're relying on rebalancing of growth in fixing the current account deficit, even though it's an important factor. So, I talked a lot about structural reforms, and we have a very comprehensive agenda to achieve all these goals on a sustained basis, but also to take advantage of opportunities that the new global backdrop presents. We need to deliver on structural reforms. The first agenda item is enhancing human capital and labor market flexibility. We've made some progress in the past, but more needs to be done. I don't have time to go into details, but clearly this is one area we're going to focus. Another key area is boosting productivity and improving investment climate. Again, there's plenty to say, but clearly there's a lot of homework, and we've already started doing some of this. Increasing savings, deepening capital markets, reducing reliance on commercial bank lending is another area, but this requires single-digit inflation. Ideally, low single-digit inflation. We'll get there. And when we get there, Turkish corporates will have no issue tapping domestic and global bond markets. Bringing in resources that are similar to equity, similar to their own capital, long-term in nature and competitive cost-wise. Public finance reform. We've already started working on it. We want to broaden the tax base because we believe that there's a lot of informal economic activity that needs to be brought under control, including public procurement reform, including rationalizing spending. Spending in productive areas is the way forward. And that's going to be one of the key agenda going forward, again, as far as our reforms are concerned. Green transition, I've already talked about it. And when we look at today's world, you cannot afford not having digital transformation. So digital transformation is going to also be a key focus area for us going forward. So, my final bit of my presentation. Is the program working? It's been a few months. Is there evidence that things are improving? Can I show something to you to convince you that we are on the right track? Well, first I need to tell you how the program is supposed to work. The program is based on very simple, pillars or tenets. We're not reinventing the wheels, by the way. Very simple, straightforward. Sound policies, structural reforms. And this leads to investor confidence, local and international. This leads to portfolio preferences or flows, exchange rate stabilization, possibly real exchange rate appreciation, and this fostering speedier disinflation. And as disinflation gains momentum, we create a virtuous cycle. And that's how it's meant to work. We believe that disinflation will support further sound policies and structural reforms. So this is how we see it working. Is it working? Well, one piece of evidence that I can show is that country's risk premium, Turkey's risk premium, has fallen significantly. This is good news because this is not a market that we can interfere with. This is a global pricing of our risk. Very simple. Globally, investors seem to think that we are doing the right things. Secondly, if you look at sovereign debt spreads, the red line is Turkey, and the blue line is global emerging markets. As you can see, we were doing pretty poorly, and now, since July, August, Turkey is beginning to outperform. Its spreads has narrowed faster. This is also good news. The pricing, this is real. Again, if you look at exchange rate volatility, very simple. Through July and August, we were way out of the emerging market volatility band. Now we are well within that band. So volatility, exchange rate volatility has diminished significantly. Now I know many of you, or at least market players, seem to think that central bank is in the game. Central bank is not in the game the way you think. We only provide FX for those who are changing from so-called protected lira deposit schemes to FX deposits. Other than that, we're not in the market. It's a rule-based in that sense. Net portfolio inflows are now positive, strongly positive, at a time when emerging markets actually experienced outflows, at least the third quarter of this year. If you look at external debt rollover ratios, if you look at banking sector, if you look at non-financial corporations, as you can see, compared to the first half of the year, the second half of the year, there has been a significant improvement in rollovers. That means Turkey is back. Again, if you look at credit growth is slowing in a way that program was meant to achieve. So it is working. Rebalancing, we are still at the early stages, but there is now evidence in the third quarter, a slight evidence that domestic demand is moderating, that external demand, that net export position is becoming less of a drag. Let's put it this way. Current account deficit is narrowing, and it will continue to narrow significantly going forward. Again, if you look at central bank gross or net reserves, whichever metric you use, there is significant improvement. Gross reserves are up by close to $42 billion since the lows of May. Now, this is important because it reduces fragilities going forward. Again, if you look at reserve adequacy, we're not where we would like to be. By the way, this includes the short-term debt is not just short-term debt, is the debt that was borrowed as medium long-term debt that has now less than 12-month maturity. So it's a broad definition, roughly about $210 billion. So reserves, gross reserves as a percentage of short-term debt is roughly about 0.83%. 83%, sorry. We would like to be somewhere close to 1 times, roughly speaking, in an ideal world. We are rebuilding the yield curve. The monetary policy was dysfunctional, has become functional. Now we have a yield curve that is beginning to reflect market readings of economic activity as well as disinflationary dynamics. So clearly this was important for us. There's been some improvement by rating agencies in Turkey's outlook. We believe that Turkey will get multiple ratings upgrades over the next few years. I can tell you this, if you look at Turkish debt spreads, it's currently trading at 2 or 3 notches above what the actual rating is. This was the case back when I was working in London, and today it's beginning to get back there. So the ratings are in the catching up phase. We believe that as we deliver, rating agencies will respond. It's encouraging what they've done so far, but they are obviously, compared to market pricing, they're way behind the curve. So as you can see, there's plenty of evidence that the program is working, that we are on the right track, but we are at the still early stages. So we need time, we need patience, we need perseverance, and that's what's needed. Turkey will take advantage of opportunities of the new economic era, which clearly has a lot of challenges, through reforms and through sound policies. Thank you very much for listening, and once again, I'm delighted to be here and Congratulations, TRT World, for bringing together such a great program and inviting me. Thank you very much.